Hello, everyone. My name's Roy Culpepper. I chair the Group of 78, which is sponsoring this conference on preventing and curtailing violent conflict. This is day 3 of a 5-day event, which started on Tuesday with 3 opening keynotes and is being followed by 8 panels on a variety of subjects. The opening panel laid the groundwork for the rest of the conference by thinking big and thinking about the context in which peace and conflict must be addressed in our day. And that was followed yesterday by drilling down into 3 particular case studies, one in Northern Ireland, one on Colombia, and one on Africa. In this 3rd day, we're looking at more intersectional issues. And we just finished this morning a panel on the faith factor, which comprised a multi-faith and multinational panel, which probed religion's possible roles in peace building and the resolution of conflict, as well as religion's fractious and destabilizing history of sowing discord. It was a very stimulating discussion. Now we go to our present panel, which will be formally introduced by our moderator, Sylvie. This panel will be talking about the new peace-building architectures for today and the future, findings from PeaceCon 2023. The Alliance for Peacebuilding held their major annual conference, PeaceCon 2023, on Beyond Fragile Ground, New Peace-Building Architectures for Today and the Future. That was in May of 2023, just a few months ago. Speakers at this panel will provide a summary of some of the findings that emerged from this conference that shed light on effective strategies and actions to prevent and curtail violent conflict. And this panel will be followed by a panel at 3 o'clock on health and peace building lessons from the field. So that brings me to our moderator for today. Gives me great
You're muted there, Roy.
Sorry, it gives me great pleasure. Is that better?
Yes.
To introduce Sylvie Lemieux, who is the co-chair of the Canadian Network for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons. Sylvie is a retired Lieutenant Colonel Army engineer and a retired executive from the Public Service of Canada. She served across Canada and has participated in the UN humanitarian mission in Pakistan as a teacher for mine awareness and support Afghans' repatriation. Sylvie has represented the Green Party of Canada in 2008, 2011 as a candidate for Glengarry Prescott Russell. So she knows about the cut and thrust of politics in Canada. I should also mention that Sylvie is a member of the Group of 78 Board of Directors and a member of the G78's Working Party on Peace and Security. Sylvie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roy. On this 3rd day of our Group 78 annual conference on preventing and stopping violence, we've heard already a lot about the essential role of civil society in all aspects leading towards resolution of conflicts. From having personally participated as a Blue Beret in a UN humanitarian mission, and now for decades in civil society challenging governments on the issue of environment, climate change, and peace, it's my honor to introduce our 3 distinguished guests involved with the Alliance for Peacebuilding. The Alliance for Peacebuilding is an organization which vision is a world where each person feels secure, dignified, and included, a world where people build peace and manage conflict without violence. Their website says in bold, because peace doesn't just happen, we build it. So I am extremely pleased to be with builders here today. The Alliance for Peacebuilding has been named the #1 influencer and change agent among peace-building institutions worldwide. Is an award-winning nonprofit and nonpartisan network of more than 190 organizations working in 181 countries to prevent and reduce violent conflict and build sustainable peace. The Alliance for Peacebuilding cultivates a network to strengthen and advance the peacebuilding field, enabling peacebuilding organizations to achieve greater impact, tackling issues too large for any organization to address alone. And as we saw over the last 3 days, when we talk about preventing violence, we have determined that the situation is never linear, always very complex, and what some of the authors have called wicked problems. So our guest speakers today are Jessica Baumgardner-Zuzik, who's a Deputy Executive Director, Liz Hume, who is the Executive Director, and Megan Corrado, who's a Director of Policy Advocacy for the Peace Alliance. So I'll introduce the first speaker, Jessica, and while her full biography is available on our Group 78 website, let me just read some of the excerpt. So Jessica is a field-wide leader with extensive research and peace-building experience, who has published several groundbreaking reports that bridge the gap between organizational, relevant research and sector-wide learning. She's a design, monitoring, evaluation, and learning specialist and economist for more than 12 years now of experience in academia and practical application in international development, humanitarian affairs, and peace building. She's over 7 years of field-based experience living and conducting research abroad in rural, conflict-affected, and transitional community. Her professional experience includes leading and participating in multinational teams, organizational change management, innovative programming, and program cycle implementation in rapidly evolving contexts. She's led research endeavors involving violence reduction, preventing, countering violent extremism, interreligious peace building, learning and adaptive management, research ethics, economic empowerment, social and behavior change communication and mass media, men engaged in sexual and gender-based violence, family planning, gender and entrepreneurship, gender and microeconomic planning, maternal and infant health, early childhood development, and cross-sector gender involvement in male-dominated industries. So, wow, we just can't wait to hear from you, Jessica. So please, I'll ask you to introduce your colleagues and please start sharing with us the founding of your most recent conference in May 2023. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sylvie, for such a gracious introduction to myself and to our team. I'm joined here on my right by, as you've already introduced, our Director of Policy and Advocacy, Megan Corrado, and on my left by Liz Hume, our Executive Director. We have the great pleasure of actually being in person today across the three of us. We are all in the office, which doesn't happen all that frequently. So we'll be kind of transitioning the screen between us, but I'm going to pull it in for me. No. Go to the side a little and provide just a brief introduction to my colleagues, a little bit of information about kind of PeaceCon that we recently held. That is what we call our annual conference. But as noted, I'm joined by my colleague Liz Hume, who's AFP's Executive Director. And Liz is a conflict expert who has more than 25 years of experience in senior leadership positions, both in bilateral and multilateral institutions, NGOs, government. She's also had extensive experience in policy and advocacy and overseeing sizable and often very complex peacebuilding programs in both conflict-affected and fragile states all throughout Asia, Eastern Europe, and Africa. And obviously, as our flagship leader of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, is also one of our big dreamers and really conceptualizes a lot of what goes into PeaceCon in alignment with our board and our broad membership base, which I'm happy to say we hit just 200 members today. And are continuing to grow. So looking forward to engaging more with others. I'm also joined by Megan Corrado, as I noted, our Director of Policy and Advocacy. Megan is an international lawyer and a policy and advocacy practitioner who works to promote human rights, peace building, gender mainstreaming, transitional justice, and post-conflict legal and governance reform. Megan has extensive experience in international development, grant implementation, and political campaign management. And she's worked on topics like democracy and peacebuilding programming, as well as processes in conflict-affected and post-conflict states across the Middle East and North Africa, within South and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Eastern Europe. So just to give you a little bit of a preview of what we're planning on sharing today with everyone, and we really look forward to engaging with everyone who's in attendance and in the future, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of AFP, the history of our annual conference, how we've developed and where that's led us over the years. I'm excited to say that last year at our PeaceCon at 10 was our 10th annual conference of PeaceCon. So 2023, the one we held, as Roy was alluding to, in May, was our 11th annual conference. We'll then also talk a little bit about what are some of these broader trends we're seeing in the peacebuilding field. How does PeaceCon as a conference attempt to unite the field around common purpose and around these broad areas that are of great import, great and small, for the field? And then how does that integrate within our work? So my colleague, Liz, will be talking a lot about kind of some of the history and some of those broad dynamics and trends that we see. Megan will be talking about from a policy and advocacy perspective, what are some of those big topics that we attempted to tackle at PeaceCon this year and how we're seeing that moving forward. Since PeaceCon was held in May, it's 4 months ago, but in some ways it feels like 4 lifetimes of change. And then I'll be looking a little bit more at our research and what we found in terms of where topical interest lies in the field of research and evidence, as well as within our interfaith portfolio, which is of great interest to AFP. So just to kick us off with kind of that brief outline, I wanted to talk a little bit about PeaceCon writ large, PeaceCon at 10, and then what we found at PeaceCon 2023. So realistically, PeaceCon, it's not just any conference. This is a gathering of change makers and problem solvers from around the world who really come together to redefine the future. A core tenet of the Alliance for Peacebuilding is collective action, and we are only as strong as the breadth of our members. That's why we're a network organization. So PeaceCon is really an important event for us. We often lead this in partnership with the United States Institute of Peace. And what Liz will talk a little bit about is how we have grown from this very small retreat years ago of just a small amount of leaders into one of the largest peacebuilding conferences held in the United States, including international and global membership that is part of our global network. So PeaceCon at 10, which was held in 2022, we had over 1,600 practitioners join us from over 120 countries. This was a dynamic cross-section of civil society, bilateral or multilateral donors. It included policymakers and lawmakers, not just from within the United States, but greatly abroad as well, focused heavily with philanthropy, the private sector, academia. And this really allowed us to also kind of expand our communication reach to our hashtag Rise to Build Peace, which we had over 21 million social media impressions on that campaign alone in terms of our global outreach and influence. Now, I'm going to share with you all a short video. It's about 6 minutes long that really summarizes what we learned from PeaceCon at 10, which was looking backwards at our 10 years and looking forward at the next 10 to think about where we could best invest our efforts as the global field builder for the peacebuilding field, as well as focus our attention within our different lines of efforts. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully it works. Give me 1 second to get it go. I want to make sure you guys can hear the sound. Okay, sharing sound. All right.
In 2022, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, in partnership with the U.S. Institute of Peace, was thrilled to celebrate 10 years of our annual PeaceCon. The Alliance for Peacebuilding's network of over 165 organizations, together with more than 1,600 participants at PeaceCon, proves that the peacebuilding field is robust, committed, and growing. We know that we don't have to accept that violent conflict is inevitable, and that peacebuilding is possible in faraway places and in neighborhoods just down the street. But we do have a violent global conflict problem. Even before the war in Ukraine, the world was already experiencing a 30-year high in violent conflict. We know that peace building is hard work. If we want to build sustainable peace and resilient societies, then we have to be able to envision a different future that depends on all of us. AFP is launching its new field building strategy, designed to elevate standards of practice, develop an evidence base for our work, advocate for game-changing policies, and accelerate common purpose and collective action. We know peace doesn't just happen, it must be built. And together, we can address issues too large for any one organization to address alone. Join us.
Dear friends, together and only together can we build a more resilient, sustainable, just, prosperous, and peaceful world.
Many of us who work in peace building continue to use the peace building tools and mechanisms which we've established after decades of trial and error. But one of the questions facing all of us as peace builders is whether we need to do more to create new tools and mechanisms in light of the pressures we're collectively facing.
We need to get out in front of these problems. But we need to take risks. Bureaucracy doesn't do that. We need to get policymakers to focus on prevention. Everyone says that's a great idea, but then they get right back to today's crisis, tomorrow's crisis. That is our challenge. That's going to be really, really hard.
We've learned that including more voices at the table ultimately fosters more sustainable final agreements. The more people, the better. The more voices, the better. The more experiences, the better.
We're committed to the Alliance for Peacebuilding being a space where we are expanding the field, learning, really committed to more collective action. We know that this is needed now more than ever.
So the vision we really have is, can we position the health sector as a contributor to peace through its health interventions? There cannot be health without peace, and there cannot be peace without health.
Historically, pandemics have forced us to break with the past and imagine what could this new world look like. And the COVID-19 pandemic is no different. And we all, as a field, have the option to either stay back in the old and continue doing things the way we used to, or we can move forward and how can we do it better together.
Of the 25 countries that are classified as most vulnerable to climate change by the UN, 14 are conflict affected or are in states of intractable conflict. And there are myriad ways in which we're seeing climate change and conflict systems come together to create even more complex realities.
Climate change may force all of us on Earth to be better, including the United States. Isn't it a moral failing to give up or be nihilistic or pessimistic? Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. You stay hopeful as a political position, as an act of the will.
As we know, evidence demonstrates that including women in peace processes can lead to more sustainable peace and durable outcomes.
Faith matters in peace building and social justice work because, as I mentioned, faith communities all around the world have the answers and the guidance on how we can all do the work of peacemaking and work towards addressing violence and injustice around the world.
What we are trying to do today to present these results, to present the best practices and experiences that we have, to understand that these information that are being collected, we are accountable for, to use them in order to better implement initiatives that benefit the local communities.
The good news is that
that there is an alternative way of thinking about peace that is very much available to people, is in a more active understanding, a recognition that peace is something that has to be built over time through ongoing effort.
Our political culture, our civic culture, is of equal significance in both diagnosing problem and finding a path to a solution.
And here in the United States, and the work that AFP has done to bring the U.S. peacebuilding community together and to connect it with the international peacebuilding community, and to move out of a role of American exceptionalism and to be accepting the wisdom from other countries that have managed deep divides.
Amidst all the chaos and hardships of the last year, in remembrance of all of those we have lost to COVID, violence, and conflict, I find hope and I am inspired by the work that you are doing. Honestly, those little and those big bits of good, may they come together and truly overwhelm the world. So I think the question of why we wanted to look back, to look forward, was really this interesting opportunity presented to us to consider, what have we learned across hosting PeaceCon year after year, sitting at the helm of often the incredible work of not only our members, but peace builders around the globe. What are those new tools and mechanisms that we're seeing or developing in light of new pressures that we're all facing collectively? How do we as an organization continue to shepherd the field from the small corner that we're operating in to stay hopeful as both a personal and political position, as these acts of the will? So this past year in 2023, as noted, we hosted PeaceCon in May, and this year's topic was Beyond Fragile Ground, reflecting on these new peacebuilding architectures for today and preparing us for the future, to really reflect upon these, what are these new tools and mechanisms we need to address this changing landscape. At PeaceCon 2023, we hosted a hybrid event this year, which was a first for AFP. We had over 107 sessions across 3 days with more than 750 in-person attendees and nearly 900 digital attendees from around the globe, of whom 700 were actually first-time attendees to PeaceCon, which is really important to us as we continue to think about how we engage with the broader community, how we bring in new individuals to PeaceCon, how we think about integration across our field, opening this up very broadly. We also had participants this past year from more than 80 countries across all of these different sectors, thinking about how we integrate across sectors from philanthropy to government work, academic, private sector, international governmental organizations, NGOs, think tanks, etc. PeaceCon 2023 had an incredible keynote address by Sherry Weston, who's the president of Sesame Workshop, really focusing on nonprofit education that produces in the United States Sesame Street, but is globally influential when it comes to working with children in conflict situations and education in conflict. I'll drop some links into the chat as well that we'll have for people to see both how you can get more information about PeaceCon, as well as access our video library for all of the sessions which are publicly available for participants. So with this in mind, what I'd like to do is hand over to my colleague, Liz Hume, who's going to talk both, like I said, some reflections with her work with the Alliance for Peacebuilding for, gosh, is it 7 or 8 years now? 8 years, who's really been a part of the last 11 PeaceCons nearly, and what that looks like in terms of how that has influenced PeaceCon 2023 and the current global landscape of what we're seeing in terms of peacebuilding and conflict trends. And this couldn't be more timely given our work in both policy and advocacy and research and the state of where we are in the US with reflections globally. So I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Liz. In one moment here.
Hi, good afternoon. Again, I'm Liz Hume, and I'm the Executive Director at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. So I know we've talked a little bit about who AFP is, but if you are not partnering with us, if you're not a member of AFP, we encourage you to join us because we are able to build and advance the field based on our work collectively, our collective action together, just like the humanitarian sector and other sectors. So I can't make that plea enough. And let me tell you, I'm going to tell you a little story about how we were able to do that, for example, using PeaceCon. So right after President Biden got elected, we knew that climate change was a big part of his policies. And we actually made sure that in our PeaceCon, our first day, our high-level panel, that we brought in climate change experts and also policymakers from the highest levels within the U.S. government. And the reason why we did that is that we wanted to make the case publicly for the reason our policy that had come out saying that conflict, violent conflict, and fragility and climate change compound each other. They're not just additive, they're compounding each other. We explained why, and we explained what needed to happen in terms of policies, resources, and funding. Now, some of it was timing, just good luck, but we had this, the US government's USAID's policy came out a month before the conference, and guess what? None of that language was in there. It was a pure kind of technical climate change policy. We had PeaceCon a month later, and we had already scheduled all of this work. We had an inkling that there might be a problem, but we wanted to shore it up. So a couple of weeks after our conference, and where a really, high-level panel was pushed on it, revised policy came out with all our language in it. And that's an example of how to take a conference and actually focus it in on a policy that you want changed. And it's not to name and shame people, but it's to bring them in and work together with them to try to see how you can, use this conference to change policy. And so that's one of the things, from a larger picture that we try to do. PeaceCon, where it started before I came to AFP, was a small group of people, and AFP just celebrated 20 years last year of its incorporation. When it first started, it was just 21 organizations that got together to say, we have to do this better. We have to collectively come together and try to see how we can use our voices collectively. I keep saying the word collectively, but it's really key in this. Accelerating collective action is what we talk about. So what happened is it turned out it has grown from this tiny little retreat of 14 to 20 organizations of people getting together and trying to assess trends, what they were learning, and then taking that to having greater impact. And as the example I just showed you, the numbers, as you saw in the video, it grows every year. And especially with the digital piece of it, like we're doing here now, we can have a much stronger global impact. But, again, looking at that one piece of how we were able to change policy and thinking about it in the future, we're just having a board meeting today, talking about what are the themes. One of the things we really want to push hard in the next year is the fact everybody is talking about prevention. They're putting it in policies. We even got President Biden to talk about prevention, but we're not walking the walk. We're talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So next year, PeaceCon will focus significantly on holding people accountable to prioritize prevention. At the same time, how do we integrate it into other sectors? And that, whether it's health, whether it's climate change, and again, not just getting the language in there, but actually what is practically and actionably happening. So that's really how we now use a big part of PeaceCon. But it's also much more than that. It's a way that we showcase incredible work that's happening, lessons learned, new research, evidence-based findings, what isn't working, and also networking. Because we know that it's through partnerships and through this collective action that we build good programs, good policies, good data, and that where it can all come together. And also innovation. As we all know, conflict drivers are coming at us, old ones and new ones. And we have to be able to be sense-making, looking around the corners, knowing what's coming, but more importantly, what do we do about it from a policy perspective, from a programming perspective? And so those are all the things that we talk about and learn at PeaceCon. And you know what else? You build relationships. That I think is key, building personal relationships as well, which is critical in terms of when you're working together. So those are some of the things about PeaceCon that, why we love it. It's also a lot of hard work, but you can have some really incredible impact from a policy level, from a personal level, from a programming level. And that's really what we push for. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Megan.
Thanks so much, Liz. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of the major themes that emerged through our PeaceCon conversations and sessions, and just kind of explore the road forward in terms of how we advocate for change in terms of the peace building field. So couple good things, some good news. We're seeing really strong gains in the acceptance of prevention. Conflict prevention is making it into laws and policies. There's actual funding for it, not much, but some. So we're seeing that happen, and the understanding that it's essential to good foreign policy and international assistance. We're seeing the localization agenda gain a lot of momentum. It's been around for some time now, but you're starting to see governments and organizations, because it's incumbent on us to make it operationalized. We're seeing it move forward. We're seeing the shift over to amplifying local voices and centering local organizations and creating programs and implementing them and monitoring them. So it's something that we haven't seen, good words have been spoken about localization in the past. We're really starting to see advances. And of course, the women, peace and security and the youth, peace and security agendas are gaining momentum as well. They're being understood as intrinsic to inclusive peace processes and creating sustainable peace. You're seeing more funding allocated to them as well. So some positive things have emerged. Unfortunately, we know violent conflict is at its highest rate in decades. We have 20 countries at risk of or currently experiencing atrocities. And conflict and atrocity prevention and peace building writ large continue to be deprioritized and under-resourced globally. There's lots of compounding threats and challenges the world is facing, and you're seeing a lot of countries, including US and others, take an inward turn, and so are not expending the amount of funds necessary for overseas development assistance and conflict prevention and peace building that we really need for impact. And of course, prevention and peace building remain siloed. We are in our own little silo over here, very separate from lots of other areas of development and foreign assistance. And of course, we can't do that because we know everything is interconnected. If the last few years with COVID have taught us anything, peace, health, humanitarian assistance, development, it's all intertwined. And we're still grappling with the implications of COVID. And of course, climate change is on all of our minds every day. We're seeing the impacts every time we turn on the news and look at a weather report. And climate change is, of course, creating more mass migration. Their human rights social media, its role in stoking divisions online and off. But it does create an opportunity. And all of these huge, huge challenges do create an opportunity for us as peace builders and advocates. Technology itself can create a more inclusive and extensive dialogue in peace processes. We can reach people who couldn't maybe come to an in-person event to talk about what peace looks like to them. We can be doing climate-sensitive conflict prevention programming, conflict-sensitive climate programming. We're having these conversations and trying to come up with a shared language where we hadn't been doing that in past years, but understanding we need to address these compounding impacts. And these are really new frontiers in which to build resiliency and social cohesion and promote integration and information sharing. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's an exciting moment as we work with other colleagues in these different sectors and can really create an integrated approach to development and assistance. But one thing that really, really struck me and many of my colleagues during PeaceCon is that we really struggle to tell our story of impacts. We're wonky, we're nerdy, we have really fun, fancy words to talk about all the amazing programming we're doing, but we need to make it more accessible and inclusive. We're not going to achieve integration with other sectors unless we can tell the story as effectively as they do. There are tons of lessons that can be gleaned from the humanitarian and health sectors. It's also very easy to show impact. We delivered 1,000 vaccines. We provided, 100,000 people with food. That's very evident. So I won't dive deep here into it, but it just demonstrates the importance of evidence and data collection and measurement. My colleague Jessica will take a deep dive there, but it's so important to have that evidence so we can make the case as advocates as to why peace building is so critical. Tell a compelling story, center our local friends, partners, and activists in our conversations, and tell the story in a way that can invite people in to join us. We at AAP, we talk about building the field. We need to build community that understands what peace building is and why it's so important and how we can work together to address the major challenges I just outlined. So happy to turn it over now to my colleague Jessica. We had a really challenging moment in this time, but we have the tools and smart, motivated people to work together. And having this hybrid conference is my first in-person element since I joined AFP 3 years ago. It just reemphasized the importance of collective action and working together, being together, because only together can we affect change. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Megan. That made my job really easy when it comes to the geekiness that I like to talk about in terms of research and measurement and impact. I joined AFP a little over 6 years ago now, and I can still remember at my first PeaceCon being asked about 1 month in to chair a session around peace building monitoring evaluation and having quite a high level of hostility from people still in the audience around, can we measure? Should we measure? What type of harm could we do by attempting to quantify non-quantifiable concepts in peace building? And I'm really happy to report that across the 6 PeaceCons I've now been a part of, there has been a consistent and persistent shift in the field in terms of how we think about what is the impact of our work, how we think about how we communicate that. As Megan said, there's still challenges on how we talk about peace building, what it means for people outside of the field. But we've made huge headway when it comes to monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and really reflecting on the state of evidence that supports our field. At PeaceCon 2023, we had the largest ever number of what I would call research-based sessions that were exclusively dedicated to some form of monitoring evaluation. Those could be technical workshops on what are impact evaluations and what are possibilities for peace building. They could be trauma-informed workshops, thinking about standards and principles for the field. Where is this intersection between empathy and culture and organizational systems? How do we consider measuring that? Things like, what does it look like to actually appraise and use qualitative evaluations to inform our work? All the way through to, very distinct sessions, considering what we've learned in a topical area like conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and what are different localized approaches for measuring change in this type of context. So these are just a few of the, in terms of, I probably should have had a number ready, especially as a Mel person. We had 32 sessions related to related to monitoring and evaluation at PeaceCon this year of some form. And we also worked incredibly hard to make sure that other sessions, whether it be a policy session focused on, next steps or informing critical legislative policies on a topic, to involve a researcher or an academic or an individual who has invested time and energy in evaluating the critical context in which this policy would be rooted, to really make sure that what we're pushing forward is also evidence informed and having those conversations. The big thing that I can honestly say, in addition to just the openness of the field in these communications, is a desire to move beyond, one approach for measurement or one way to tell our story, and trying to be more comprehensive, whether that's concepts like broad level inclusion, who we integrate into our research methods, who has a voice in them, as well as who leads that process. Is this something that a donor is dictating, or is this something that a local organization is creating and having input into? These are tough conversations, and they have huge implications on how we do our work. But I think one of the challenges the peacebuilding field faced for many years in monitoring, evaluation, and learning was attempting to take examples from other fields, as Megan was alluding to, where some of these concepts are very easy to measure, and applying that to our field, which wasn't always a best fit model when understanding what trust building looks like in different cultures, or attempting to understand how we reflect on prevention or a broad concept like de-radicalization. Those aren't as simple as a copy and paste from other fields into ours. So PeaceCon 2023 to me was a huge shift from the norm. It really culminated from those first couple PeaceCons I participated in, where there was a level of hostility and controversy around, what does this look like? Should we be doing this too? Okay, how do we do this? And let me show you what we're doing so you can learn. So very, very exciting. We also saw a broad-based, and I think this is relevant to the conversation Roy was saying you all had this morning. We have a large portfolio in our learning and evidence portfolio looking at interreligious action or interreligious peace building, particularly on evaluating impact of interreligious action for peace building. So we always have a broad contingent also of interfaith sessions that can look at both the impact or different ways to measure or consider or evaluate interreligious peacebuilding or broad-based inclusion writ large. We had a large contingent of that at PeaceCon 2023 that's continued to persist for us as an organization. And then the final thing I'll say in terms of measurement, we also have been working on hosting a series of what we call regional MEL, or regional monitoring, evaluation, and learning sessions that really focus on topical issues that are hosted, led, and kind of dispersed by local organizations within unique contexts. Sometimes these will be in French for, say, Francophone West Africa. We've had Spanish sessions related to LAC, or Latin America and the Caribbean, to really try and see what is the important topics that are going on in these different contexts, and creating that space to have that discussion from a local or relevant context for others. This is more than just language. This is also in terms of cultural concepts that could be affecting, questions of monitoring evaluation. It also has to do with things like time. AFP is based in Washington, D.C. We've tried to open and expand our conference, particularly our hybrid or our digital sessions, to times outside of our normal, 9 to 5 on the East Coast. That's been hard. That's a struggle for us consistently. So our regional MEL sessions are also open at regionally relevant times, whether it's 4 a.m. Eastern time for our Southeast Asian colleagues, or thinking about later evening for different colleagues, or our Africa or Asian colleagues. They've been really successful for us to make sure that we're engaging with individuals where they are, and making sure we're having culturally and locally relevant conversations, particularly around research that is often highly contextualized and is important when it comes to both researchers as well as policymaker and implementers to have that consideration when they're attempting to apply research or conversations around it. In terms of where this is heading for AFP, we've continued to integrate a lot of the key topics that came out of PeaceCon 2023 into our research portfolio. That includes particularly around preventing and countering violent extremism,
considering that both on a domestic sphere for the United States, as well as internationally. We're concluding a systematic mixed methods review on PCBE literature that should be coming out at the beginning of next year. We also are continuing to support our policy and research team on conflict sensitivity and conflict integration. Questions of what does this actually look like in practice? What are standards of conflict sensitivity and integration that we as a field think are important? Considering also questions of practicalities. What does that look like? How do you know if you're doing it right or well or contextually relevant? Also looking at areas related to climate security, as Megan was alluding to, this intersection between conflict and climate. What do we know about localized versus national versus regional approaches? How does that play out for policymakers, for practitioners? And of keen interest to AFP and our research portfolio consistently has been this concept of measurement. We have the IRENE Peacebuilding database, which really captures and will be expanded this year to over 12,000 peacebuilding indicators to try and understand what is our field actually measuring and what are we attempting to show change within. This is always a big question for us of, well, how do you measure this? If you can't measure it, then it's not happening. So this is a continued area that we really try and pull from the field to see how are people successfully doing this. And this is integrated within how they're telling their story, to how they're informing policy, to even what laws and legislation is being written on and asked for accountability on, including in big concepts like the Global Fragility Act and others. So those are just a couple of reflections for me in terms of research. Just to close this out before we turn to questions and answers, I wanted to give a little bit more time to our Executive Director, Liz Hume, to, from all of this, she sits at this really interesting helm of both representing AFP globally, but also being the recipient of our broad and vast network to understand and think about what are reflections for our future, where are areas that we're prioritizing or we want to be focused on across our technical capacities in narrative work, in policy and advocacy, in learning and evidence, and of course our collective action. So I'm going to hand this over to Liz here for just a few last reflections.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just to follow on a bit from some of the things that my colleagues talked about, I can't emphasize enough accelerating collective action. We have, in 2018, we hit conflict records. And as I tell people, if things were going really well, we would be out of business, or we wouldn't have to, be advocating and educating and hounding people so much. The global trends are not going well, both in the global South and in the global North. And as I say, you don't have to look any farther than right here, for example, in the United States. So we have to do better. We have to up our accelerated collective action. We also, but as Megan said, we are so wonky and technical. We have to make sure we have a really good elevator pitch, that we can show our work in action, how it has made impact, make the case for it, show that we've had impact through evidence, and understand how we reframe and reshape our narrative. We get out of our technical wonky space. And that's really some of the things that AFP has been working on here in the United States. Our research has shown that when we talk about the interconnectedness of our work, building bridges, staying away from crisis messaging because it terrifies people, making sure that, we don't hype up one person specifically and show that this is a group effort. Because when you really focus in on this, amazing person, people think, okay, well, that person is amazing, but I'm not that amazing. So really making sure that we know what's working, what's not working, that we hold ourselves accountable to it. And that is really where, we're focusing in. But the other piece of it, and as resources go down, we have to make sure that we are integrating our work into other sectors. I'm going to give an example, the health sector. Once again, you don't have to go any further than looking at the United States to see how badly we did during the pandemic. But for that vaccine, I can only imagine what the United States would look like today. So we know that countries that have high scores in social cohesion, trust, did well. We also know countries that did poorly, like the United States, have declining social cohesion, bad numbers on trust. 14 straight years of declining social cohesion. So we need to be better at making champions within the health sector, the climate change sector, recognizing that they need us. They need peace building. They need conflict prevention work in their work, so that they can make sure that pandemics, that there's a way to actually reduce and prevent pandemics instead of having them get weaponized and actually add to conflict grievances. So we have a lot of big challenges ahead, but we have to do it together. And once again, we encourage you all to join us and partner with us and accelerate collective action.
Great. Sylvia, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, well, my God, thank you so much, Jessica, Liz, and Megan. You have covered such a wide spectrum of the subject that a group of 78 have been discussing for 40 years. So I have some questions already in the Q&As, but because I'm the moderator, I'm gonna ask a few questions at the beginning. Obviously, we understand some of the nexus that are more priority, like the climate change the nexus with conflict, the pandemic, the health and things like that. Like for sure, we have been reflecting on this, and we understand the work collectively. And as I'm looking at my notes right now, I'm not really sure where to start, but one of the things that, in my 30 years doing this kind of business, like one of the questions I always have is, I always marvel that Davos, is able to bring everybody together and they all agree to say the same thing on money and profits. And civil society then gets to deal with everything else. And civil society has, quote unquote, moral mandate to tell their governments at all levels that they're lacking, in providing, as equally as possible to their people. So one of the books that really shocked me a long time ago was this title, and I forgot that the author was Civil Society. Which civil society? And it was a little bit cynic, in a way, but the author was basically saying that, one of the big problems of civil society is that they're so divided. Everybody's going with their own little plan, running in all kinds of direction. Meanwhile, we've got the economy and the people wanted to make money, all agreeing on how they're going to keep going in that direction and not talking about the rest. So there's division and conquer. You are working, counterclock to this, because what you're doing is you're combining and you're trying to collect people, you're trying to help people, so congratulations on that. In a way, what the Alliance is doing, I have experience attending social forum. So I've attended a few social forums in the world where it's very chaotic, but there's some 4,000 sessions happening all at once, and people go to whatever session. But that's this one place where I felt I was part of a global humanity, where I could pick and choose. But again, there would be a lot of sessions, and a lot of them were on peace or peace-related, prevention of conflict, like ownership of land and lack of resources, displaced people, so they all had these different titles, but if you would group them all, they would be about, working together better, or what Liz has said, they're accelerating collective action, right? So there's various groups in the world, and I'm amazed. And again, 200 members, congratulations. You have the title Alliance for Peacebuilding, and some of us, very technical people like me, we go peace building or peacemaking or peace watching, or so sometimes people get stuck in a title. So I would really like for you to tell me why you choose peace building. And are you really encompassing all the aspect of peace? I think you are, but I think it's important in that definition. So that's my thing. No definition. I think we're talking the same thing. Why you choose this one? And one of the questions I want to ask is that I was very appreciative of the video you share, because I saw a lot of young people. And one of the challenge of our organization and some of the organization I belong is that we have a hard time, attracting youth. So those are the two first questions I would like to ask. I have others, but I'll just use this platform as the moderator, ask these two questions, and then I'll go to some Q&As.
All right, well, let me talk about peace building. I'm going to hand over youth to Megan, but peace building, the term, we, again, as a sector, get really caught up in terminology. I'll give you another example, conflict sensitivity. We've been, using this term for over 2 decades and haven't been able, and really what you're talking about is integration, and haven't been able to get this term or get an uptick in this. So this is what I say. I don't care what you call it as long as it gets done. We fought for a long time during even the Obama administration over using the term violent extremism. And we spend a lot of time, we say it's called navel gazing, right? Where we spend a lot of time. And in the process, a lot of good work doesn't happen. So let me go back and just talk really quickly about peace building. Well, and let me just say something about conflict sensitivity. We pre-COVID in 2019 brought in humanitarian and health actors and said, what happened in the DRC with Ebola? Humanitarian actors, health folks ran in there. Health clinics were being bombed, doctors were being killed. And they came to, they were like, we don't understand what's happening. So we sat down and I said to them, tell us what we're doing wrong, because we're not able to connect our conflict work, our prevention work, our peace building work, and within, let's say, the health sector. So they said a couple things. One, we don't want to use the term conflict or peace. We're neutral. Now, we know that's not true. Anytime you deliver assistance in any way, there is biases there. But they're like, we are neutral, and you're taking that neutrality away from us. You always just tell us what we do wrong, that we cause conflict, but you don't tell us how we can integrate this work into you. So I've gone and talked to the peace building field and said, okay, do we have to make them say conflict? Conflict sensitivity or conflict integration? Can we call it risk? Again, don't care what you call it, want to make sure the work gets done. So let me pivot back to peace building really quickly. Again, this has also been a term that has been debated, discussed. We just did a podcast with 3 of the individuals that helped start up AFP 20 years ago. And there was no word peace building. Actually, among the United Nations, the term was peacekeeping, right? That's what people really understood. Yeah. Around this time in early 2000s, I helped start up the Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation at USAID. You couldn't even say the word prevention back then. So how did this term peace building come around? Lots of discussions. There's still discussions around it. But peace building really focuses around the fact it's the action. It's the fact that you're building something. It doesn't just happen. It's about not just preventing conflict, because that can be just negative. I mean, that's important, but you're really talking about peace building and encompasses reducing and preventing violent conflict, fragility, violence, but also building sustainable peace. So we really take that term to be very encompassing. However, something very interesting to think about in the global north. So in our work globally, in places like Sudan or Afghanistan, that is not something that is going to be a contentious word, and it's just an accepted word. In the global north, especially right here in the United States, peace building is almost a bad word. People don't like it because it's a connotation that there's conflict. Well, there is. We know there is. But so, it is kind of a hindrance in a country like the United States. And what do we say about it? You want to reduce polarization, you want to build empathy, things like, we're looking at other trends and words that you use because peace building doesn't resonate here in the United States. And it also turns people off because they just don't see themselves in the midst of a serious conflict, which we know, the United States there's never been a time in my lifetime, for sure, but in our recent history, where we haven't been more conflict affected or fragile. So I'll leave it there. I don't know if I answered your question completely. If you have any follow-up questions on it, obviously we have a lot to say about it, but ask away.
Just one last point on the terminology, and I think it kind of goes back to what both myself and Liz were saying earlier about narratives and framing. Liz mentioned bridge building, and not in bringing two sides together to have a conversation, but bridge building requires strength, time, maintenance. Peace. Even if you have a peace agreement and it ticks all the right boxes and has all the right elements, it's going to take time to implement and keep it in place over time. That's that sustainability, that durability. And so I do really like that bridge building metaphor and how it relates to peace building. On your question about youth, it's been an interesting couple of years. I think, I mentioned earlier, the YPS agenda is gaining a lot of momentum. At AFP, I think we're very lucky. We have a lot of academic members from, higher institutions of learning, a number of universities, graduate programs, law schools, et cetera. So we have kind of a wonderful conduit of engaged and excited youth breaking into this field that are both part of AFP. We have a number of youth in our organization, but also in our member organizations writ large. So we've been really relying on them. And it's been exciting to see them grow and learn. A lot of the youth in our network were responsible for the introduction of the YPS Act in the U.S. Congress. Hasn't moved, hasn't been passed, but we have language, we have bipartisan support for it. So it's less about the politics of it and more about just hopefully our Congress doesn't really work anymore, but there's excitement and it's these true young leaders that are spearheading this effort. And then of course our work globally, we talk about inclusive peace and you're seeing, there's over 1 billion young people in the world. And so we cannot build peace if we're not including these folks who are intimately affected by conflict, fragility, and of course, violent extremism as well. And I think one real big rallying point we've seen has been surrounding climate. They're going to be the ones to save us. I'm an old millennial, but it's really going to be the Gen Zers and below that. They're the ones who just accept and understand that we need to act now. Because it affects their lives. They won't, become my age or older if we don't make dramatic changes. And so I think that activism you've seen emerging from the climate change crisis is really integrating into the peace field and they're understanding the nexus and seeing things really clearly. So I think that's been one avenue that's really helped mobilize our youth effort.
Thank you so much. Yes, I do like all of the thinking around the terminology, but I just wanted to make sure, that, like you said, narrative is so important. And one of the things that was mentioned, and I'm sorry, here my notes are a little bit scrambled, but the idea of, how to attract people, this idea of the interconnectedness, the fact that we're really working as a group effort, and as much as possible, staying away from the doom and gloom, staying away from the crisis. So it's the right balance of emotion. It's exciting. We need your help, and there is place for you to help. So it's striking that right emotional equation where people feel all empowered, then they can move together. And but sadly, it's a big, huge global file. So it's the idea of prioritization. Well, we haven't been really successful in the last few years in getting youth to our groups. So maybe that needs to be a separate conversation. But thank you for answering my question. Now we have two questions in the Q&As, and I feel like I should present them to you together and see what we can what you can share a little bit more with us. So Richard is asking, what does accelerating collective action means in practice in specific steps of activities? So you have talked about maybe the health sector, but maybe this other sector. So Richard is looking for practical step in activity. And Professor Irwin Waller says, good to hear the emphasis on accelerating the shift to effective prevention, from belief in prevention and compelling stories. The U.S. demand for fentanyl and export of arms accounts for hundreds of thousands of violent deaths each year in the Americas. What is your recommendation for accelerating the change needed?
Easy questions here. I mean,
you have a very informed group, right? So sorry, we don't walk around things. We just go straight for give us your best advice here, please.
Okay, let's see how we can divide up these questions.
Collective action and practice in terms of activities, direct, what are recommendations there?
Okay. All right, I can take that one, and then the
prevention.
Okay, so it's a great question. And I'm going to give you an example in terms of from the health sector. I've been thinking about this a lot. So when COVID got weaponized just here in the United States, there's a lot of things that we could have been doing. The way we talked about it differently. And I'll just give you one example. After President Biden got elected, he came on TV and was doing that to people, telling them he was tired of it. People had to go get vaccines. He was sick and tired of, people not doing it. And, I sat there and listened to it. And were the terms deplorable used? No, but that's, we all knew who he was talking to, right? So my advice to the administration was, you can't do that. We have to infuse empathy in there. Looking at neuroscience, we know that people are afraid. It's only logical. Fear is logical, actually. So we need to be looking at how do you call people in, not call them out. So, my advice to the health sector was, facts aren't going to do it, but trying to understand what was driving fear of these vaccines and how to call people in, not call them out. Understanding that, and just naming it. We understand you're afraid. I have grandchildren, for example. I don't. I'm pretending to be Biden. I'm not that old yet. But talking about, looking at how you call people in, not call them out. Pulling in the brain science of what is fear, what do we know, how brains are activated, and really applying that work, right? So there's a messaging piece of it. A lot of the science folks came to me and said, I don't understand. We're the science folks. Why are they giving death threats to Dr. Fauci? So really unpacking that work, but also looking at communities where the work was done well. In West Africa, because you've had Ebola come through there, you've had trust built amongst communities and health institutions. So we could be learning a lot from those types of countries and where they've done it well, for example. So that's what we're talking about, but really recognizing that, and it's going into some of the pandemic response index, looking at why the US and Brazil sit so high on those indexes from a response, but yet did so poorly. And going in and looking at how they're measuring this, you don't just get a big check for being a democracy, and that throws you high up on the list, right? Recognizing why things like trust in institutions, trust in society are so important, and how we have to integrate that work into health programs. So those are just some really practical examples of what we're talking to in terms of the health sector, of what could be changing. And literally, when they go in, if they are working in a country, if they're working in Iceland to, I don't know, reduce some virus or something, we don't need to be there. We don't need to be working with them, because the social cohesion is so high. But if they are working in conflict affected or fragile states, they have to be integrating peace building conflict prevention experts to understand what the risk is and how they can mitigate it, manage it, prevent it, and then also use their work to build peace. We listened to a program the other day of doctors working in Palestine and Israel, doctors from this region, and how working together, to promote empathy within, different groups of people, has helped, help build some capacity in these areas. So there's all sorts of examples, but we have to do better at it from that perspective. The next question is, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Just a quick point on the first, I think it really does go back. We keep talking about narratives and that shared language. And so again, not sitting in the echo chamber, talking to ourselves, and we can have, these wonderful, interesting technical conversations all day, but it's really about bringing in folks from those other sectors. So we had an event the other day around the International Day of Peace. We brought in a colleague from the World Health Organization who's working on a peace program. So how can we, all the good work WHO is doing, how can we integrate peace building and peace thinking?
And have them build champions,
exactly,
so that the health sector folks are being our champions, and vice versa.
And how can we frame our work, peace building, in a way that resonates with these other colleagues in different sectors? I think a practical example comes to mind with, now in Sudan, also in the wake of the withdrawal in Afghanistan, you really saw human rights, humanitarian development, education, technology, peace building groups all coming together under common cause to mostly protect partners that were remaining in the country, but it was an opportunity for all those different sectors to come together and realize, we've all been working towards, similar good goals. And there's an opportunity for actual impact of policy and law and a response when we all collaborate. And so it was really interesting, we would send sign-on letters, and all of a sudden, instead of having the 40 or 50 or 60 peace building organizations on it, we had 400 signatures of really big players from these different sectors, because we all got together, built consensus, did some peace building amongst ourselves. So it's difficult, but the impact can be really profound.
Okay, and I'm gonna quickly I'm not gonna talk about fentanyl and arms to Canada, but I'm to Mexico, sorry. But I'm sure we're doing that too. We're doing lots of bad stuff in the United States. Although you did send down a lot of smoke. So
sadly, we were so sad about this.
I will say that. Okay. These are problems that need to be addressed, but you cannot address these problems when your government can't govern, or your government isn't working together in a bipartisan way, and there's not trust there. We all know there's a good chance the US government is going to shut down on Monday. That prevents us from having good immigration policy. That prevents us from dealing with massive opioid drug crisis in the United States. So this is what we need to step back and say, what is driving the conflict here? And I'm just going to say in the United States, but we are polarizing, but so are other places. We're polarizing faster. So again, we are exceptional at this. But if you look at the UK with Brexit, Le Pen in France, the government in Sweden, the Dutch government fell over its immigration policy, Italy. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Again, the US is leading the way, but these are trends we're seeing globally in the global north. So what is causing this? We have definitely inequality and structural racism here in the United States, of course, and that has to be addressed. But at the same time, we know that the United States in 2040 will no longer be majority white Christian country. It's not a switch that's going to flip, but we are seeing those trends and demographic changes. They are happening. And again, it goes back into that neuroscience piece that I'm talking about. People are afraid, and it's logical to be afraid of change, and to feel and fear that you are losing social status, power. So we need to address that. We need to understand it, and we need to address it. And that is something that, also we have to look at, on all sides, what people are doing to contribute to this conflict. In the United States, we are becoming extreme versions of ourselves. And so that is a key part. We have to actually understand what is driving the conflict here, and more importantly, how to address it. Because I'm going to say one other thing. We are exceptional at the fact no other country in the world ever in the history of the world has a majority of the population that feels like they've built a country, they own a country, it's their country, has lost demographic power. We have had lots of countries where you had a minority government lose power. Look at South Africa. It's never happened this way and also in a democracy. So we have to figure out a way of how to build a just, democratic country, equal and equality for everyone. And it is going to be difficult. I'm not 100% convinced the United States can do it, but we have to address this problem now so that we can address the other issues that are not only impacting the US, but globally.
I mean, I would just say we need to do a little peace building and democracy building here in the United States.
That's right.
In particular, a lot of it's very difficult to be a policy person and an advocate in this political environment, but the institutions with which we work have become so rotten from the inside, and a lot of it surrounding the laws and regulations that they created. I mean, it goes back to dark money and the way individuals and organizations, particularly, huge corporations, can influence things like, political elections. And so you've seen the cascading impacts of what happens when dark money gets into politics, and I won't go on the soapbox about that. But it does segue very nicely to my point that we do need to engage the private sector.
Yes.
They're a critical actor that we have not engaged as a field enough. They're the ones that are developing and building the fentanyl and the arms. And so if we don't start talking to them, both here in the United States, and that's writ large, and we're talking about the extractive industries in various places in Africa or Papua New Guinea, for instance, talking to these big players who have an interest in peace because it actually helps their bottom line when the country in which they're working is stable. So I think there's an opportunity both to talk to them, ensure their work is somewhat conflict sensitive, but also to get them to start funding peace building organizations.
Yes, and we need conflict prevention and peace building work here. And just as an example, what the US has given to Canada, for example, is your the truckers strike, right, or the truckers blockade. So that's an example to show. And I think, was that about mask wearing? I can't even remember what it was, but it was something around that.
Yeah, the vaccine obligation. And
so to show how the things that happen here in the U.S. impact our allies in the global north, but also, going to Mozambique. My husband works on global health, and our bad policies, or make it out there. Their point is, well, if you guys don't want to get vaccinated or wear masks, why should we be doing it here? We're so interconnected through the internet. So we need more conflict prevention and peace building work in the United States, and it has to be based on evidence. So, that we're not like, oh, let's put our bridge building program together and just bring Democrats and Republicans together and maybe they'll be civil to each other and talk. That's not going to cut it. That's not going to do it. And it means we actually have to get uncomfortable and move into and work with people that are feeling aggrieved on many sides. One other little last tidbit on that is, the folks were the Oath Keepers and people from rural areas at January 6th. Did they breach the Capitol? Yes, they did. But the majority of people that breached the Capitol on January 6th were white people, upper middle class, living in very rich counties, not QAnon believers, and wouldn't join the Oath Keepers. So that should tell you something. It's a lot more marginalized and mainstreamed, this kind of anti-democratic feelings than we know or we're willing to accept.
Yeah. And then I'll just
sorry. You can tell we're very passionate about these issues.
I'll give just a couple of quick notes from a research perspective, because that's really where I sit compared to a policy perspective on these two questions. So the one in terms of, what does it actually look like in practice in terms of accelerating collective action? What are some of the things that we do in a research realm? So just as a couple of, concrete examples, one of the big things that we do, because we're not a think tank or a research firm, what we do in terms of our research initiative is really work on field-wide research that can support the advancement of our field, not singular programs, not singular organizations, but thinking about establishing a state of evidence and what we do know works, or where we still have questions, or where we need to generate hypotheses for the field to test. So we do a lot of research work around collective syntheses, practice-oriented research to try and understand how do we then know what's going on, what's showing, positive success, where are questions still coming up, or just as importantly, where are we seeing failure? So that's an example of some of the activities we do around collective work there. We also, as a network base, receive a lot of research from our members that's unpublished. This is super important because a lot of times what remains kind of in that dark is where some of the best lessons lie. So we're able to kind of receive that and aggregate that to really inform and improve the field. We also do work around things like setting standards. This involves important components of what I call the carrot and the stick, working with donors to start requiring some of these different components of standards, whether that's things like best research ethics that are necessary for our field to adhere to. Just saying we do right does not mean that we do it well or that we always do it right. As well as considering how we can create more of those carrot components, how we can encourage the field to embrace stronger ethics or components or best practices around integration or sensitivity. So just a couple of concrete examples from the research perspective of some of what we do around how we work on accelerating collective action. In terms of just two comments on Erwin's questions in relation to active prevention that really stood out to me. From a research perspective, a critical component here is establishing those causal connections, really understanding what leads to what. We constantly see this in other fields, whether it's something as simple as we know that eating fatty foods increases your cholesterol and your risk of heart disease. Just telling people that does not mean because it's good does not mean that they will stop doing it. But understanding that pathway is so important for us to establish better programs to help encourage better behaviors, better actions, as well as from a policy perspective, where to invest our funds for the greatest, our limited funds
for the greatest bang for our buck. Is it as simple as it is in other fields to establish those? No, I'm not saying it is. But Liz, I think, was getting at something really important there that I feel very deeply around how we, in terms of prevention, if we don't know leading people to respond or behave in certain ways, or what causes certain reactions, we inherently are throwing, planting 1,000 flowers and seeing what blooms, which we cannot afford to continue doing that, not just solely because of the urgency and the complexity of the problems, but because of issues of limited resources and constraints in terms of how things operate. So it's super important to invest in that and really thinking about what are the underlying factors that do lead to these different components, whether it is, exporting our own conflict abroad, whether it is funding and fueling conflict abroad through our own private sector actors, or whether it's turning those things inward. And when you first mentioned about fentanyl and things and exporting those to Mexico, my first thought was, we're not addressing our own backyard and the issues we have in terms of our own massive drug issues and overdose and hidden health crises here around drugs, but as well our own issues we're learning around gang violence in the United States, and how that's increasing and connecting with identity questions, connecting with toxic masculinity, polarization, all those fun things.
And if you've seen the news lately, one of the things in Philadelphia, for example, we have these flash mobs going into cities, stores, and breaking into them. So much so that we're seeing stores shut down. So, just as an example of violence that's happening here in the U.S.
So I would just say from a prevention angle, one of the things that we're super interested in, from my perspective in research, is understanding those underlying mechanisms, both to that cause or lead to these types of behaviors, positive or negative, and identifying inflection moments and points to help prevent that is really critical. Not just saying we want to focus on prevention, but what are those upstream areas that we can invest in to lead to change.
And there's a lot of things that the global north can learn from our work internationally.
Okay, so as you can guess, I have way more questions, from the audience, but I've already sent my apologies to most of them, because we're running out of time.
But you can always reach us.
Yes,
You can always reach out to us. We're here. Like I said, join us, work with us, and please reach out to us.
Yes, well, I think it's Jessica who mentioned that she'll be sharing a library, which got my attention, and some other links. So we'll make sure that we share this with all our attendees, but also all of our members. I just want to thank you for this, quick, condensed, session with us today. It's very nice to meet, colleagues in the field, pragmatic and idealistic colleagues in this field, and I'm quite encouraged by our presentation here today. You were very transparent with us. I know that when I attend a social forum, wearing a Canadian flag has got its advantage, and I remember working on my humanitarian mission that my U.S. colleagues were also wearing the Canadian flags in Pakistan.
I've done that before.
Yes. So, to be able to be with you, as close neighbors, and being able to see that, what we see in a potential implosion in your country, and you really spilling it all out for us today.
But you did send the fires. You did send the smoke to us. So
we did. Sorry, but yeah. So anyway, I just want to say thank you very much. I have to kind of write, and I want to thank my rapporteur that are on this session, Maggie and Gabrielle. We're going to have great time here trying to, there's no way we can summarize all of these aspects, but it's the interconnectedness It's not just neighborhood boundaries here. We are interconnected. It's the prioritization of our policy and advocacy, the language we use, the allocation of resources, talking to the right people, get the right funding. We also have to be the flavor of the month and be able to adjust and be able to influence action on the field. So anyway, thank you so much. I want to thank all of our attendees for the session today. Certainly, I'm left with more questions, and now I could see. Thank you very much that you've given us all of the YouTube and the link and access to your library. So thank you very much, Roy. I don't know if you want to say a few words before we go to Peace Song.
I'll just add my thanks to you. I hope we can interact with AFP more frequently. This is a great beginning. But I'd like to turn it over to Gord to play our peace song to end this session.
And can I just say thank you to Gordon, because longtime member of AFP. So thank you.
Our pleasure. And yes, I would join in promoting membership in AFP. It's been very valuable to us. I'd just like to play another peace song. We're playing one after each session. This is going to be a bit different. Up till now, they've been pretty traditional peace songs. For this one, I've personally chosen Bob Marley and the Wailers. It's called Fussing and Fighting, but really it's not about that. It's from 1971, and in the song you will hear, we should really love each other in peace and harmony. Instead, we're fussing and fighting. So in defense of the title.
Like we ain't supposed to be. Tell me